Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the problem solving session for the NPTEL certification course, Environmental Impact Assessment, Week 1. I am Isha Rathod, a research scholar at Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. And I am a doctoral student at the Department of Architecture and Planning, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. And I am the PMRFTA for the NPTEL course. And you can connect to me to LinkedIn on the following LinkedIn ID. So as you know, the course is divided into 12-week units, and each of the week contains lecture on different topics. So week 1 talks about the introduction to environmental management and environmental impact assessment, EIA. We're going to look up at each week in the problem solving sessions. And the problem solving sessions are scheduled for Saturday and for Tuesday. I will be taking the Saturday sessions from 4 to 6 p.m. For the following weeks, and another PMRFTA, Monica will be taking the Tuesday sessions for the following weeks. And what can you expect from these sessions? So we're going to talk about the key takeaways from each lecture unit. Uh, and then we're going to solve the assignment questions with detailed explanations, and we're also going to practice additional Q&A based on the week's content. I'm also going to clarify queries which I received on the week's content in the discussion forum. So please feel free to post your queries in the discussion forum and ask away all the queries that you have about the week's content. And next, we're also going to talk about a focused topic where we're going to extend our discussion on a particular topic from this week's content. So first, we're going to talk about the highlights from week 1, and we're going to before we begin, I would like you to take a moment and to look up at the cover image of the United Nations Global Environmental Outlook GEO6 report. And this is the most comprehensive global environment report since 2012. So I would like you to take a moment and look up at all the different elements that the report cover has. So for example, you can see the mountains, you can see the clouds, you can see the natural setting of the sun, you could see windmills, you see the hydropower plants, the dams, you see buildings, uh, you see green roofs, you see different types of vegetations, you see different modes of transport like a renewable energy running car, a water boat, a freight container carrying uh, goods and transport importing, which is also connected to a sort of an air inflated balloon to identify as a renewable way of moving. You can also see like solar panels on houses. You can see different animals, livestock. You can see fishes. You can see a chameleon, a honeybee, a kingfisher. You can see plants, flowers, different type of vegetations. You can see people. You can see a farmer, a observer, a planner, and different types of people. So this is just to identify the different elements of environment and how they are interconnected with each other. And so the report talks about all of these different elements of environment interacting and communicating with each other and provides a comprehensive explanation of the effects of climate change and how environment is being affected by human induced activities. And so if you want to have a further understanding of the topic, you should definitely look up at the contents of the report and read through interesting topics, because it also talks about policy and mitigation efforts that we can take and the governments can take across the world to improve the quality of environment and create a healthy planet for healthy population. So to begin week 1 in review, so the week 1 had 5 lecture modules which talked about the state of global environment for different parameters. So lecture one talked about the state of global environment for air. So in lecture one, we looked up at emissions, which are a major cause of air pollution, climate change, stratospheric ozone depletion, and the exposure to persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, which lead to long-term and short-term health effects for human beings and other environmental biodiversity. We also looked up at the effect of air pollution in terms of the health conditions such as 6 to 7 million premature deaths per year. And this is also the projected value for the decade. That is 4.5 to 7 million premature deaths per year in this decade. And we also look up at the economic cost of air pollution, which amounts to US $5 trillion annually. This is 10 to the power 12 in a trillion. We also look up at how urban residents and people who are dependent on burning fuel are more vulnerable to particulate matter or air pollutants. So both urban population and rural populations who use wood for burning or other non-renewable sources for burning are more prone to being affected by particulate matter, which causes health problems. We also looked up at how certain sector emissions are decreasing, but they are being offset by large increases in other sectors, especially in developing countries. So, for example, because power plants, large industrial facilities, and vehicles have regulations surrounding them, they are being controlled and regulated by the regulating bodies and the governments in terms of their emission control and release, whereas unregulated sectors such as agriculture, domestic fuel use, construction, forest and open fires, which do not have a very active regulations around their emission control, are leading to a larger increase uh, in carbon emissions. And this is also more prominent in developing countries because they do not have regulations uh, surrounding the emission control for different sectors, especially for unregulated sectors like agriculture and other things. Also, we see that anthropogenic or human activity based greenhouse gas emissions have increased, which has climate impacts as well, despite mitigation activities being taken by the different governments and people across different sectors. And the only way to control and improve the quality of environment is to lead to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to meet the climate goals set up in Paris Agreement 2015 and so on. So for example, if we look at the current state of affairs, so for example, Diwali, which is the festival of lights, especially celebrated in India, where we burn firecrackers, we see that the concentration of particulate matter 2.5 increases particularly much higher in the weeks leading up to Diwali, in the days leading up to Diwali. So the WHO recommended limit for particulate matter is set as 0, whereas daily average for 2021 was around 100 microgram per meter cube of air. And this is already way above the WHO recommended limit. But in the days of Diwali, so for example, on 24th October 2022, which witnessed a maximum firecracker, also corresponding to Diwali, we see that the concentration of particulate matter or air pollutant in the air has increased to 500 microgram per meter cube, which is a considerable value above the recommended level limit. Also, it was observed that Diwali 2022 had a considerably lower particulate matter concentration compared to other Diwali events since 2015. So Diwali 2022 was still better in terms of air quality than Diwali 2021 and 2020. So this is just an instance of a human-induced activity leading to air pollution, especially as an event based on a particular country. Next, we talk about lecture 2, which talked about the state of global environment for the parameter of biodiversity. So we looked up at biodiversity, which described the diversity of living things at genetic level, at their genetic composition level, at the species level, and at the ecosystem level. And we understood the importance of biodiversity in regulating the climate, in filtering air and water, and maintaining the quality of these variables, and in enabling soil formation and in mitigating the impact of natural disasters. We also looked up at how environment is connected to the human health, and we see that when this dynamic is impacted, it leads to the rise of infectious diseases such as zoonotic diseases like bird flu, uh, swine flu, viruses from bats, because the biodiversity is being disrupted. And this leads to interactions between the different species change. So that when this dynamics change, it leads to effects in the human health and the larger system. Also, we looked up at that. Also, we observed that genetic diversity is declining, which is threatening the food security and the resilience of ecosystems. For example, in if you would have remembered the locust swarms invading and destroying crops in parts of India and Pakistan in the past few years, you would know that how a small change in biodiversity could lead to events such as these, and these affect the agriculture system and food security. So when crops are being destroyed, it leads to a gap in demand being met. So this causes food security being disrupted for human beings. Also, because the food chain and food webs are connected to each other, we say that the that a particular organism is connected to another organism, and then they are connected to each other, and they help in regulating the population of particular organisms. But when the system is disrupted or the genetic diversity is lost, the other organism population is unchecked, and it causes this dynamic to change. So there's overpopulation, and this causes the food cycle to have to adjust and face these challenges where the ecosystem is being tested. Also, biodiversity loss is caused by land use change, habitat fragmentation, overexploitation, and illegal wildlife trade, invasive species being coming up, pollution and climate change, and this is driving a mass extinction of species. It is believed that we are in our sixth cycle of mass extinction of species, and this causes critical ecosystem services being disrupted, and it also causes, so mass extinction compromises the Earth's ecological integrity and its capability to meet human needs. So when mass extinction events happen, they affect the entire ecosystem and the Earth systems. Also, biodiversity loss causes a problem in terms of equity for vulnerable groups such as poor people, women, and children. So moving on to lecture 3, which talked about the state of global environment for oceans and coasts. We look up at how oceans are being facing issues such as ocean warming and acidification, ocean pollution, increasing use of ocean coasts, deltas and basins for food production, transportation, settlements, recreation or tourism, resource extraction and energy production. We also see the rise of coastal megacities coming up, like Dhaka in Bangladesh. And we also looked up at how the rate of human-induced greenhouse gases are driving rising sea temperatures, rising sea levels, which are affecting the ocean and coast ecosystems. We also see a rise in ocean acidifications, and coral reefs are being devastated because of these changes, such as coral reef bleaching, a phenomena which was explained in the video. Also, we looked up at marine plastic litter, which includes microplastics, which occur at the marine level. So when fish or other water animals consume uh, these plastics, they can enter our, our food cycle as well, which was evident from this study, which was conducted in 2022, where for the first time, microplastics was found in human blood. And this study used 22 blood samples and determined that 17 of the blood samples contained microplastics in the bloodstream. And this is extremely concerning because when microplastics enter the bloodstream, it can cause our natural body functions to be disrupted. But these plastics are entering our systems from packaging, food packaging, from bottles, from clothes, and it is a cause of concern for human beings as well. So now next we move on to lecture 4, where we looked up at the state of global environment, land and soil. So we see that the food production is the largest human activity which uses land, and it uses approximately 50% of the habitable land. So habitable land is described as a land which is fit for human survival. That is, it is neither too hot nor too cold, and there's an existence of water. Also, we see that land degradation and desertification is increasing, and this is an active threat for the well-being of humans and for the ecosystem, especially for people whose livelihoods are dependent on land, particularly rural people who practice agriculture, and they are heavily dependent on land for their productivity and their livelihoods and incomes. So also we observe that land degradation hotspots cover approximately 25% of the land globally, which means that 3.2 billion people residing on that land are vulnerable to land degradation and displacement. We also see that deforestation rates, although having been slowed, is still active. That is, deforestation is still happening across the world, but the rate has declined. We also see the rise of urban clusters, which means urban centers coming together, and they are growing at a factor of 2.5 since 1975, which also leads to the effect of urban heat island, where the urban areas are uh, have much higher temperature compared to their corresponding rural areas, and this causes a large increase in temperature, especially during events such as heat waves, where the temperatures are already high, but because of the built material surrounding the urban centers, the heat is being stored and it leads to the warming of the entire urban area. Next, we look at lecture 5, which talked about the state of global environment, fresh water. So we see that the pressure on water resources across the world is increasing because of population growth, urbanization, water pollution, and unsustainable development practices. We also see that this pressure is further increased because of the effects of climate change, and it leads to disasters such as water scarcity, drought, famine in vulnerable areas across the world. We also see that the water quality has worsened since 1990, and this is because of the use of fertilizers entering the systems, the discharge of organic and chemical pollutants into the river waters in other water bodies. And this leads to other things such as pathogens, excess nutrients, sediments, heavy metals entering the water systems. And there is also a rise in water salinity being observed. We also see that water resources, especially fresh water and oceans, are overexploited, and they're poorly managed and are usually polluted. And this means that approximately 1.4 million people die annually from preventable diseases such as diarrhea, cholera, and parasite-based diseases because they do not have access to clean drinking water and proper hygienic sanitation facilities, especially people in Africa. So moving on, we look up at the Q&A discussions. So we're going to practice a few questions based on the week's content. So the first question is Silent Spring, which is one of the most influential books in the modern environment movement, was written by A. Richard Heinberg, B. Rachel Carson, C. Anne H. Hurling, and D. Richard B. Norgard. So the correct answer is B. Rachel Carson. The second question is the case of Santa Barbara was related to A. Oil spill, B. Air pollution, C. Noise pollution, and D. Forest fire. If you remember from the videos, the case of Santa Barbara was related with oil spills, so A is the correct answer. Moving on, question 3, human-caused emissions are driven by changes in A, urbanization, B, economic activity, C, climate change, and D, all of the above. So the correct answer for question 3 is D, all of the above. This is because human-caused emissions are driven by urbanization, the rising in population and increase in factories and mass production. Also, economic activity and climate change put pressure on cause human emissions. So all of the above options are correct. Which of the following is not an air pollutant? PM10, PM2.5, ground level ozone, and stratospheric ozone. So we know that particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5 are air pollutants. Also, ground level ozone is responsible for the depletion of the stratospheric layer and causing stratospheric ozone hole. So ground level ozone is also an air pollutant. However, stratospheric ozone is not an air pollutant. So D is the correct answer. Next, we look up at the question 5, which is match the theme in group A with a descriptive question in group B. So we have themes in group A, which are ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. And we have to match them with the respective figures in group B. So the correct answer to this question is B, which is P matches with 3. So we see that image A, which is of 3 individual rats, but they are all genetically different in their composition, in their genetic material composition. So this is one matches with genetic diversity R, which is correct. Next, we look up at the second image, which has a variety of species and animals coming together. So we see a snail, we see a rat, we see a frog, we see fungus, tree leaves, type of weeds, grass, and things. So these are different species which are together. So this image corresponds to species diversity. So Q matches with 2. And then we see the last image, which looks up at 3 different type of ecosystems. That is a forest, a river ecosystem, a grassland ecosystems, all of them being displayed. So we see diverse ecosystems in this image. So P matches with 3. So the correct option is B, which is P matching with 3, Q matching with 2, and R matching with 1. So moving on, we come to question 6. So state if the following statement is true or false. A mass extinction event is when species vanish much faster than they are replaced, and this is usually defined as about 75% of the world's species being lost in a short amount of geological time, less than 2.8 million years. Is the statement true or false? So the correct answer is true. The statement is true. A mass extinction event is defined as about 75% of the world's species being lost in a short amount of time. So moving on to question 7, we look up at the what is the correct definition of background rate of extinction? And is it A, Earth's normal extinction rate is often assumed to be between 2 and 5 species per 10,000 species per 100 year? Or B, Earth's normal extinction rate is assumed to be between 0.1 and 1 species per 10,000 species per 100 year? Or is it C, assumed to be between 0.1 and 1 species per 20,000 species per 100 year? Or is it D, assumed to be between 0.1 and 1 species per 10,000 species per 1,000 years? So the correct option for background rate of extinction is Earth's normal extinction rate, assumed between 0.1 and 1 species per 10,000 species per 100 years. So B is the correct answer. Moving on, question 8, which among the following are the fastest growing coastal megacities? So this is a multi-select question, so more than one options are correct. You need to identify all the correct options. So we have option A, Lagos in Nigeria, option B, Guangzhou in China, option C, Dhaka in Bangladesh, and option D, Delhi in India. So the correct answers are A, B, and C, which is Lagos in Nigeria, Guangzhou in China, and Dhaka in Bangladesh are all coastal megacities which are fast growing. Delhi is not a coastal city or a coastal megacity, as it does not have a coastline. Moving on to question 9. Following are the environmental benefits received from the coastal ecosystem. A, coastal stabilization. B, regulation of coastal water quality and quantity. C, transportation of heat. And D, all of the above. So the correct answer is D, all of the above. The environmental benefits from coastal ecosystem include the stabilization of coastline, the regulation of the coastal water quality and quantity, and the transportation of heat. Moving on, question 10. This is again a multi-select question. Which of the following are marine issues? A, depletion of tropical coral reefs. B, ocean currents. C, ocean noise. And D, sand and deep sea mining. So the marine issues are A, C, and D, that is tropical coral reefs, bleaching, ocean noise, sand and deep sea mining. Moving on, question 11. Is this true or false? Desertification is land degradation in arid, semi-arid, and dry subhumid areas resulting from various factors, including climatic variations and human activities. A, true, B, false. So the correct answer is true. Desertification is indeed land degradation in arid, semi-arid, and dry subhumid areas resulting from various factors such as climatic variations and human activities. So the statement was correct. Moving on, question 12. Mining activities have following environmental impacts. This is again a multi-select question, and this you need to select more than one options. So the environmental impacts are A, it affects the ecosystem, B, it causes soil contamination, C, it causes water pollution, and D, it causes air pollution. So the correct answer is all of the above, which is A, B, C, and D. Mining activities indeed cause all of the listed environmental impacts. Moving on to question 13, which is as per United Nations World Water Assessment Program, WWAP 2012, water scarcity is defined as A, less than 10 meter cube per capita of available renewable fresh water per year, less than 100 meter cube per capita of available renewable fresh water per year, less than 1,000 meter cube per capita of available fresh water per year, and D, less than 10,000 meter cube per capita of available renewable fresh water per year. So the correct answer is C, that the water scarcity is defined as less than 1,000 meter cube per capita of available renewable fresh water per year. Moving on to question 14, state true or false. The term economic water scarcity is used where storage, treatment, and conveyance infrastructure are lacking. Is this option true or false? So this is indeed true. Economic water scarcity is when you do not have enough storage infrastructure, treatment infrastructure, and conveyance infrastructure for storing water. So this is indeed true. So moving on to question 15, where we need to match the themes in group A with their descriptions in group B. So we see that P, eutrophication, matches with 4, which is the natural aging process of lakes and wetlands, wherein they become enriched with nutrients and sediments, becoming more biologically productive, usually over a long period of time. And we see instances of lakes having more biologically productive water level, you see a lot of green layer coming up on lakes and water. This is because it has enriched with more nutrients and sediments, which are causing more growth of the biological systems in the lakes and wetlands. So eutrophication is associated with lakes and wetlands. So P matches with 4. Then Q, which is organic pollutants, matches with 1, which is the organic pollutants such as microbial decomposition of liquid manure, sewage effluent, sewage treatment, sludge, and other, which deplete oxygen concentration and water bodies. So organic pollutants cause all of these effects. So Q matches with 1. Then heavy metals matches with 2. So we see that heavy metals such as arsenic, cadmium, nickel, mercury, chromium, zinc, and lead impact plant growth, degrade the water quality, groundwater contamination for all of these cases. And then salinity is, of course, an increase in the quantity of dissolved minerals in fresh water from the land use changes, agriculture, irrigation, drainage, lake evaporation, seawater intrusion, sea level rise, water obstruction. So all a rise in dissolved minerals in fresh water is matches with salinity. So P matches with 4, Q matches with 1, R matches with 2, and S matches with 3. That is the correct matching order. So next we're going to look up at week 0 assignment. So what is EIA? Is it A, Environmental Monetary Fund report, or B, is it a process of identifying, predicting, and evaluating the likely impacts of a proposed project or development to define mitigation actions to reduce negative impacts and to provide positive contributions to the natural environment and well-being? Or C, a report written by government representatives on the planned development impacts of environment, socioeconomic issues, and culture? Or is it D, a project life cycle assessment? So EIA is in fact the process of identifying and predicting the impact of a proposed project or development on the environment and providing mitigation measures such that these negative effects are countered, such that it causes a positive contribution to the environment and well-being of the humans and other biodiversity. So moving on, what is the full form of SEA? So A, Strategic Environmental Authority, B, Strategic Evaluation and Assessment, C, Strategic Environmental Assessment, and D, Sea Environment Assessment. So the correct option is C, Strategic Environment Assessment. So it is a systematic process for evaluating the environmental implications of a proposed policy, plan, or program, and it provides a mean for looking at the cumulative effect of the environmental implications and then addressing them such that their economic and social considerations are accounted for in the earlier stage of decision making. So SEA is Strategic Environmental Assessment. So C is the correct option. So question 3 is, which type of project usually requires an EIA? This is again a multi-choice question, so more than one options are correct. A, small housing building, B, dams and reservoirs, C, industrial plants, large scale, and D, garden development. So the correct options are B and C, which is dams and reservoirs. So these are large projects which require clearing of land, looking at the flow of the river, controlling that flow, possible impacts on the surrounding neighboring villages and people's livelihoods being dependent on them. So an EIA needs to be done in cases of dams and reservoirs because they are large level projects which affect the environment and the natural flow of things. Then again, industrial plants are important to do an EIA for because you need to see what sort of manufacturing or activities the industrial plant is going to do, what sort of emissions level they're going to do, what sort of controls have to be established, what are the transportation and other activities which add to emissions and things. So an EIA is required for large-scale industrial plants as well. So moving on to question 4, in the India Environmental Protection Act was enacted in A, 1976, B, 1958, C, 1986, and D, 1972. So we see that the Environmental Protection Act was indeed enacted in 1986, and the objective was to protect and improve the environment. And it empowers the central government to establish authorities which are charged with preventing the environmental pollution in any form and tackling other environmental problems. And the act was last amended in 1991. So the correct option is C, 1986. Moving on to question 5. What is the full form of CPCB? A. Climate and Pollution Control Board. B. Central Pollution Control Board. C. Center for Pollution and Climate Behavior. And D. Climate and Planet Conservation Board. So the correct expansion of CPCB is B, which is Central Pollution Control Board. This is a statutory organization which was constituted in 1974 under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974 and the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. And the functions of CPCB is to promote the cleanliness of streams and wells in different states of the country, and to improve the quality of air and to prevent air pollution in the country. So CPCB is the Pollution Control Board, Central Pollution Control Board. Moving on, we're going to look up at the queries from week 1. So from lecture 1, which was on the state of global environment in air, we have the following queries. I can't understand how agriculture, forestry, land use emits 18.4% greenhouse gas emissions. Explain with example. So this is based on the image shown on the left, which is from the ourworldindata.org, which shows the global greenhouse gas emissions by different sectors. So the question majorly revolves around the use of forestry, agriculture, and land use. How does it emit 18.4% greenhouse gas emissions? So as you can see that the agriculture, forestry, and land use is further divided into 7 categories, which is the livestock and manure, agricultural soil, rice cultivation, crop burning, deforestation, cropland, and grassland, each of them contributing a different percentage towards the total 18.4%. So this is based on the measured data, and the source for this was the World Resource Institute 2022, in which they measured these emissions for these different sectors. So how these different sectors contribute to the total agriculture, forestry, and land use is as follows. So for example, something like deforestation, which contributes 2.2%, the carbon emissions are counted as positive if there is deforestation, that is, forests are being cleared, so that so the carbon sequestering potential is being lost, so that is counted as positive emissions. And then reforestation is counted as negative emissions because we are planting saplings which are going to absorb CO2, so that is considered as negative emissions. So deforestation, the entire 2.2% is basically the net emissions of carbon dioxide from changes in forestry cover. So both reforestation and afforestation values are counted. Again, these are also counted based on the changes in the forest soil because it acts as carbon stores. So the total net emissions are being counted for deforestation. Similarly, the same is being counted for cropland because when the crops are cleared, it's counted as negative. It's counted as positive emissions, but when crops are planted, it's counted as negative emissions. So the total of these emissions contribute to 1.4%. Again, grasslands contribute to 0.1% based on the same net emissions of carbon dioxide. So moving on, crop burning, which is when crops are burned. So they these are the burning of agricultural crops, which leads in the residue releases of carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane, and this contributes to 3.5%. Subtle burning or crop burning is still practiced in northern parts of India, and a large proportion of uh, and across the world as well, crop burning is practiced, which leads to 3.5% of emissions from this crop burning activity. Moving on, rice cultivation contributes to 1.3% because rice fields are flooded with water. Water needs to be stagnated for the growth of rice, and it produces methane through the process of anaerobic digestion. And this organic matter in the soil converts methane to low oxygen environment, but then methane is again a carbon greenhouse emission gas, which is considered. So rice cultivation causes 1.3% of emissions. Then moving on, we have agricultural soil, which contribute to 4.1%. So uh, fertilizers being applied to soil produce nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas, and this causes 4.1%. Then moving on to livestock and manure, which causes 5.8% of emissions for the sector. So animals, they produce, especially cattle and sheep, which are rearing animals, they produce greenhouse gases in their digestive systems for breaking down food, and then they uh, produce methane as a byproduct. And this also means that beef and lamb, when consumed, have a higher carbon footprint. It's also a larger proportion of uh, meat factory, which is contributing to these emissions. Also, we see that the manure of these animals produce, when decomposed, produce nitrous oxides and methane under low oxygen conditions. So again, emissions from that sector, from that activity is counted towards the total agriculture, forestry, and land use sectors. So the breakdown is basically from all of these different activities contribute to the agriculture, forestry, and land use, and the total of all of these activities add up to 18.4%. So that is how the agriculture, forestry, and land use emit 18.4% greenhouse gas emissions. This is based on the measured data. I hope that answers your query. So moving on to question 2, which is what exactly is PM 2.5? This was also one of the questions which was raised in the live chat. So PM is basically particulate matter, and the number 2.5 is basically the diameter of the particle. So particulate matter 2.5 is air pollutant with a particle of 2.5 microns in diameter. And so the reason why we define this diameter or this number is for air quality regulatory purposes. And particulate matters with a diameter of 10 micron or less, that is PM10 or less, are inhalable. So you can breathe them and they go into your lungs and they can cause adverse health effects. So particulate matter 2.5 is also known as fine particulate matter, or particles with less than 2.5 microns or less than 2.5 microns are considered as fine particulate matter. And they are very tiny particles that can reduce your visibility and cause the air to appear hazy. So when there are high pollution levels, you can't see beyond a particular uh, vision length. So that is because of the presence of these particles. And it causes long-term and short-term health effects for humans. So short-term health effects include eye, nose, throat, and lung irritation, coughing, sneezing, runny nose, shortness of breath. It also affects the lung function, worsen asthma and heart conditions. Also, long-term exposure to these air pollutants or particulate matter 2.5 or less can cause increased rate of chronic bronchitis, which is a condition where you have difficulty breathing. Also, it reduces your lung function and increases mortality from lung cancer and heart disease. If you remember the graph which I showed for Diwali concentration, you could see that PM 2.5 concentrations are being shown for the days leading up to Diwali, and the concentration of PM 2.5 is approximately close to 500 microgram per meter cube of air, whereas the WHO recommended limit is 0. So I think this paints a picture of how air pollution is affecting our daily lives. I hope that answers this question. So moving on to the next question. Why is India's pollution levels higher than Western countries like US, despite that Indian lifestyle is still more sustainable? There are a few reasons why India's pollution levels are still higher than developed countries like US. This is because India is a rapidly developing country and we have rapid industrialization. We are also a rapidly growing economy, which means that we are still developing in sectors like industrialization and urbanization. So this leads to increased emissions from factories, power plants, transportation sectors. Also, there's a lack of regulation around these sectors. The environmental regulations in India are not as stringent compared to the Western countries like US, where they are very strict and rigid, and they are enforced particularly well. Also, our agricultural practices are the major reason for pollution levels, especially air pollution, because certain parts in India still practice subtle burning or crop burning in in certain regions of the country, which causes a huge amount of air pollution. As pointed out by one of the participants, that the rise in air pollution comes from states like Haryana and northern states which practice subtle burning. Also, the energy mix in India is still dependent on unrenewable sources such as coal for energy generation, especially in rural areas where we still burn coal, we burn firewood, which adds to emissions and pollutions level in the country. Also, the population density in India is quite high, and we are a growing population, which puts pressure on resources and infrastructure, which leads to overcrowding conditions and high level of pollutions in the cities. So a lot of these factors contribute towards the pollution level in India compared to the US or Western countries, which are far much developed and have adapted and put towards regulations um, for controlling their pollution levels. Although the Indian lifestyle is sustainable, these factors outnumber the added advantage of our lifestyle. So a lot of these factors contribute to our higher numbers in pollution. I hope that answers the question. So moving on, the next question is, what is the role of mercury emissions on the environment and what what are its impact on human health? Okay, so mercury emissions cause contamination of soil and water, and mercury can enter the food chain and affect other organisms and can further, because the food chain is connected to humans as well, can further enter humans as well through the food chain. Also, mercury emissions cause air pollution, which damage the crop and forests, which can again, so crops again are connected to uh, humans in the food chain, so they can again enter the humans through the crop route. So in terms of human health, mercury is toxic to humans and it affects the brain, nervous system, reproductive system, and immune system, causing long-term problems for the humans. I hope that answers your question. So moving on to the next question, which is based on the graph showed, India is at the top in weighted ozone concentration and in gaseous mercury levels. Is it at a disadvantage due to Earth's wind pattern? If wind is also carrying pollutants from other areas, how can India fight that? Okay, this is an interesting question. It is possible that India's high level of weighted ozone concentration and gaseous mercury levels are influenced by the wind patterns or the dust belts, as shown in the lecture video. But air pollutants can travel long distance by winds, leading to regional and global distribution of these pollutants. But there are certain factors, such as our own local emissions, because we still rely heavily on coal-fired power plants and uh, other non-renewable sources of energy. If we make the switch to cleaner technologies, we will be much able to fight it. But a large portion of our emissions are because of the in-house local emissions, and air pollution things. And the second thing is to improve our air quality monitoring and management. So it is to so we need to identify the sources of pollutants and to target mitigation efforts to reduce these emissions at the source. Also, we need like a stringent energy policy and control measures which are enforced to control these emissions happening over long term. We could also encourage international cooperation and work with other countries to reduce these emissions on a global scale. So those are some of the measures in which India can fight our pollutant numbers. So I think that will all. Okay. Another question is, when we study the impact of climate change, impact in men are more visible or given importance, and they are studied. Impacts on other organisms included in AIA. Yes, so impacts on other organisms, including flora and fauna, are indeed included in AIA. So AIA is basically when it looks at the entire biodiversity impact of the proposed project or development uh, on the environment. So it is an important component. Biodiversity is an important component of AIA, and they look up at other organisms other than humans. Although, uh, yeah, but yeah. So EIA is used to identify and mitigate potential impacts on wildlife and habitats, and to ensure that the proposed projects are developed in a way that minimize harm to environment and its biodiversity. EIA does consider other organisms, but a majority of these impacts, uh, it is more widely studied and presented for human beings, but biodiversity is included in EIA. Uh, are the impacts on other organisms included in EIA? Yes, so the impacts on other organisms and ecosystems are significant and have far-reaching consequences, especially from climate change, where you can see that different species such as Arctic foxes and polar bears are moving towards warmer regions because of the changing climate and rising temperature, and this changes the dynamics between the existing food cycles and the food webs, because the interactions between species which were not interacting before starts happening. So we see uh, these interactions happening, and these are quite visible. We also have the swarms of locusts coming to destroy crops. That is another impact, and on other organisms. We also see wild animals uh, coming out of the wild to develop cities and countries in search of food and uh, other things, because their habitats are being destroyed. So these impacts are visible, and AIA does consider those impacts within it. Yeah. So moving on, queries from lecture 2, which is on state of global environment biodiversity. So what is the MT or PM red line in the extent species bar chart? Okay, so I believe the uh, learner was pointing towards this graph, which shows the proportion of species in each extinction risk category. And this is based on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. So on the left-hand side, we see the different species of uh, existing species, and then the x-axis shows the proportion of extant species from 0% to 100% in terms of a fraction. And the right-hand side shows the total species assessed in each category. So, and the legend basically shows EW, CR, EN, VU, DD, NT, LC, MT, and PM. So the learner is referring to MTPM line. So EW basically means extinct in the wild, so species which are extinct in the wild. CR is critically endangered species, EN is endangered species, VU is vulnerable species, DD is data deficient, NT is near threatened, and LC is least concerned species. So, uh, so the way we read the this graph is basically we look up at the red line, which is the minimum threshold or population management MT or PM line, and this is so this line basically shows the sum from 0 for critically endangered and vulnerable species within each of the studied species. The extinct in the wild species is not included in the extinct species uh, list, because if these species are reintroduced in the wild, they will flourish. So EW, the darker green color, is not included. So we see that the proportion, the red line basically shows the proportion of existing species, excluding the uh, extinct in the wild category. So this is basically the sum of all of these, uh, the light green, vulnerable, and part of the data deficient category, because data is not available about these species. So the IUCN makes an assumptions in terms of what should be the percentage to be included. So the red line is basically based on that. So in case of cicadas, you could see that this data is not considered, and the line moves this much backward. So it's basically the proportion. The red line shows the proportion of existing species. Okay, I hope that answers your question. So moving on, lecture 3, the state of global environment, oceans and coasts. The following are the queries which are received. The world's ocean comprise over 90% of the habitable space on the planet. I'm not getting the meaning of habitable space because the ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface area. Am I missing something? Okay, I think the learner is referring to this slide, which talks about the world's ocean comprise over 90% of habitable space on the planet. And so you are correct in assuming that Earth is about 29% land and 71% ocean. That is correct. However, habitable zones are described as areas which are just right for life. That is, they're neither too hot nor too cold. And so surface area refers to the total area of the planet or the object surface. But in case of regardless of its ability to support life. In case of Earth, the ocean covers 70% of the surface area, but over 90% of the total volume of ocean is considered as habitable space because it can support marine life. So that is the major differentiation. The key word here is the habitable space and not the surface area. I hope that answers your question. Moving on, why has capture fishing plateaued at 90 million tons? Is it because of overfishing and destruction of the oceanic benthic ecology, particularly due to troll fishing? The reason why this graph basically shows the capture fishing and aquaculture production. So capture fishing is basically when you go and capture fishes, and aquaculture is when you farm fishes to meet up your fish demand. And over the years, it has been shown that the capture fishing has reduced, has plateaued at 90 million. This is because aquaculture is meeting the demand. That is, we are farming more fishes instead of capturing them to meet the demand from the food industry. Yeah, I think that is the answer to this query. So moving on, lecture 4, state of global environment, land and soil. Could you please tell us elaborately how land preservation promote gender equality? Okay, so land preservation promotes gender equality in the following 4 ways. So it empowers women to take up land ownership and control. For example, when uh, protected areas through tourism and forestry enterprises are given to local villagers, women take up a more active participation in ownership and control. I will give a case example of this in the next slide. The second instance is that it improves the livelihoods of the local communities by providing them a stable base for the earning income through these protected areas and preserved lands. For example, protection of forests provides them access to non-timber forest produce, such as fruits, plants, medicinal resources, and they can be collected and sold by these communities. They can also practice sustainable agriculture and fishing if water bodies are present within the preserved land. The third instance is that it supports the health and well-being because the land is preserved, it maintains the health of the ecosystem and their services. So they provide so they improve the quality of water and air. So the health and well-being of the surrounding communities increase. Also, it provides opportunities for education and capacity buildings because it helps when land is preserved, it leads to the uh, active participation of women and other vulnerable groups in the management and decision making of these areas. So this also leads to opportunities for development of skills and knowledge. So just to give an instance of this, an example for this explanation, so this is a research study which was conducted by a group of people, and this is a case study of the Periyar Tiger Reserve, Kerala, located in Kerala, India. So we see that how self-help groups, which are basically groups of uh, local women, come together and they started patrolling the forest to restrict the illegal stem cutting, grazing, and other natural resource degradation process. And they do it so they patrol the area from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And they do this. So women community has come together to protect this uh, preserved land, and they have taken a very active participation role in maintaining it. So women are empowered by this practice. Also, because they are patrolling these areas, they're also uh, doing using the forest resources in a sustainable way to manage their uh, livelihoods. So this is just one of the examples of how they have become like a self-help group, uh, like a empowerment example promoting gender equality. Okay, moving on. Next question: is environmental impact assessment and life cycle assessment similar? The similarity between EIA and LCA is that both of them evaluate the environmental impact of a product, service, or process, but there are significant differences between EIA and LCA. So EIA is more of a method for predicting the implications of a proposed project or development and evaluating the potential risks and benefits from that project. And it focuses on the direct and indirect impacts of that project on the environment in terms of air, water, biodiversity, land use, etc. But it looks at the impact of a single project. Whereas LCA considers the entire life cycle of a product, service, or process, and it does a comprehensive quantitative analysis of the product, service, or process from cradle to grave. That is from its inception to its decomposition or disposal, from raw material to production, use, transportation, disposal, everything. So it's more of a difference between, so AIA is more of a project based thing, whereas LCA is more of a product based thing. So LCA forms a component of AIA, but they are not the same thing. but they are similar in terms of that they assess the environmental impacts of a project or a product. I hope that answers your query. So in this week's focused topic, I would like to talk about the economic value of environment. So when we talk about environment, we just talk about the benefits that the environment has on the health, well-being, and overall quality of life. But if we look at the economic cost or value of the environment, so cost is basically the price or the uh, monetary value, monetary equivalent of how much you spent on procuring the raw material. So there's no cost because it's natural, but the value is the benefit that it adds in terms of money over time. So we look at the economic value of the environment, and we do this with a specific case study of India. So in 2021, in West Bengal, India, the West Bengal government decided to build 5 railway overbridges by clearing 365 trees. And this project was, the project budget was 500 crore rupees. And there was no EIA done for this case because the Environment Ministry guidelines exempt EIA of any road project which is less than 100 kilometers in span, and this was just 5 railway overbridges. But it required clearing of 365 trees. So the Supreme Court of India heard this matter, and the matter was taken up there. So it constituted a committee of 5 experts to determine the economic value of a tree. So the just to understand the economic value of a tree, we need to look up at the what are the possible benefits that the tree does. So it provides you timber, it provides you wood, you can use wood and other products. It prevents the contamination of soil, uh, prevents the topsoil from being getting washed away by rain. It improves the quality of underground water by binding the soil together, letting nutrients flow down. It provides natural shading against the ambient conditions. It extracts CO2, releases oxygen. It provides natural cooling because of the benefits. It has a heritage value if it's older than a certain number of years. It also have an ecological value in terms of providing shelter to different species of animals and biodiversity and maintaining the ecological balance and a lot of things. So the committee considered all of these effects, and it came to a number for a tree. Can you guess what is the value of a tree? Economic value of a tree for per year. So the committee decided that one tree is equivalent to 74,500 rupees per year. So the true value of a tree with 100 years of lifespan, imagining that the tree is going to live up to 100 years, would be approximately 72 lakhs. And the committee said that since 53 has already been cleared, the remaining 306 trees, many of which have heritage value because they are older than the certain number of years, they are valued at rupees 220 crores. That is, cutting of these tree, for cutting of these tree, the government should pay a price of 222 crores. And this calculation is based on the products of these tree that they would produce over the 100 years of its lifespan, including oxygen, nutrients, compost, biofertilizers. Besides, the trees are valuable members of the natural environment. So this calculation was based on this. Also, the committee added that if the road is widened, it would require cutting down of 4,000 more trees, and that would lead to a cost of 300 crores more. But if the real loss to the environment and humanity over the years will be taken into account, the value of these 4,000 trees would be close to 30 crores. So this is just an example in India of what the value of environment is. This was just, yeah. What are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay. So because the session was cut short, I would like to thank you for attending the session. And if you have any feedback, you can provide it in the discussion forums. Also, if you have any topics that you would like me to cover, you can put them in the discussion forums. We will surely cover topics in the discussion forums. If there are any more queries, you can put them in the discussion forums. We will take them up in the next week's session. Thank you.